Hey guys, how are you all beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is next part of Godlike Hokage in Naruto. The Gura Gura no Mi is known as the strongest fruit in the world of One Piece. In Naruto world, the blood limit would grant the strongest power for those ninjas. But what if the Gura Gura no Mi is found in the world of Naruto and after it is eaten it will be like a blood limit power? Well, the MC just took that fruit. This story begins before the Second Ninja War by 2 years. So let's start without any delay. Naito looked really pissed at the way the other Shinobis tried to gank him. But he couldn't attack his own people, he could only stare at them with a really cold look. The place was dark, Naito was using his Ultra Perceive to sense them, and he couldn't help but notice that guy from the Uchiha and how he was laughing. He's laughing because Naito's monument got destroyed. Is it a matter to laugh? Humph. Without thinking twice, Naito stared at the Uchiha guy and snorted. The level Naito has reached allowed him to control the spiritual shock and condense it to hit one target instead of doing area damage to the whole place. Boom. The Uchiha member suddenly felt a horrible force crushing him, his mind started roaring, and he felt that his head is going to explode. Under this terrifying pain, he activated his Sharingan. He thought that this was a genjutsu, and he tried to resist it. But in the next moment, that horrible force got stronger, and instantly the guy fall on his knees, feeling nothing but fear and horror. With one stare Naito destroyed the guy's spirit. This will teach you to know your place. Naito took a last glance at him, then he shook his head casually. After that, Naito looked at the other Shinobis in front of him. Naito didn't target them with his spiritual shock, still, it exposed a horrible momentum that left them in fear. But this only normal, after all, from one look the guy beside them crushed on the ground. After he shook his head, Naito didn't feel like talking to them, and just disappeared in the air. The Shinobis kept looking at each other in disbelief. Did he just disappeared? What the hell? Not anyone can reveal such momentum, and that speed. Is it possible that this guy is really you, Naito? The Shinobis almost forget the Uchiha guy who was shaking next to them, and all froze in their places with an unbelievable look in their eyes. Naito Dono is still alive. At Naito's home. The place was really clean, there was no dust while someone was sitting quietly in the room. After the announcement of Naito's death and the establishing of his monument, Kushina moved directly to his house. The house wasn't gonna stay empty forever, someone will eventually take it. Perhaps in the modern world, this is something difficult to understand, but in this world, where people die every day, this kind of thing is normal. Kushina couldn't stand the idea of someone else living in Naito's house, so she moved directly before anyone else take advantage of it. She took his house so she can wait for him to come back. Kushina fell asleep on the table in front of her. You could see how much she was tired physically and emotionally just from looking at her face. After all, the blow she took in her heart was really hard. Silent. The door was gently opened. Naito could feel that Kushina was in the house, so he didn't want to make any noises and disturb her. He closed the door so quietly and walked in. Naito came close to Kushina and looked at her. He couldn't find Kushina in her house, actually, some other people were living in it. He felt slightly surprised, but it wasn't unexpected. Because the moment he thought about the reason she decided to move in her, Naito gently felt touched in his heart. No, such a thing will never be forgotten, he could even feel it in soul. Naito's real age is actually not the same as Kushina, it's enough to be her big brother. For a long time, Naito felt like he should treat her like a sister, but since he saved her, something changed. Do I love her? The crazy beating in his heart was enough to be the answer. He couldn't help but touch her cute sleepy face. Kushina was from the Uzumaki clan, and she was also the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Although she couldn't control its chakra, her perception for the outside world was quite strong. With some confused eyes, she woke up. She recognized the face in front of her from the first glance. It was the face that she cried herself every night to sleep to see, yet she didn't look happy. Although it has been a long time, yet Naito never left her. He appeared every night in her dreams. Am I dreaming again? Kushina couldn't resist the feeling in her heart as she extended her hand to touch Naito. However, before she could even reach his face, Naito gently caught it. Wake up, you sleepyhead, wanna go grab something to bite together? Holding her hand with one hand, he expended the other and pinched her on her cheek. Kushina suddenly stood up and looked at Naito. Then she rushed so fast toward him as she was afraid that he's gonna disappear, and with her whole strength she tightened her arms around him as if she wanted to melt him inside her and never get separated again. Don't cry. Naito helplessly smiled. Although he couldn't see her face, he could tell that she was crying. At the same time, he could feel two soft things on his chest. Cough. Wow, they become really big. It seems you grew up a lot in the few months that I was left. Suddenly Naito smirked, and came close to her ear and said these words. In the midst of that surprise and the emotional return of Naito, she suddenly heard these words, and the whole atmosphere was gone. Suddenly her cheeks became so red, and let go of Naito and stared at him. Couldn't you just say anything else but this to comfort her? I'm sorry, I get uncomfortable in these kinds of situations, but... Naito smiled at her, then he suddenly stepped forward, and hugged her really tight. Kushina wanted to say something, but suddenly she widened her eyes. As Naito's hands held her close to him, she looked really shy. Kushina tried to resist it, but she had no more strength left in her to do so. For a long time, the two of them kept hugging each other, as if there no one and nothing in this world but them. Even though she didn't want to get apart from him, her cheeks were really red. Biting her lips, Kushina kept looking at Naito helplessly and didn't know what to say for a while. Pervert. Come from the person who moved to my home without permission. Naito looked at her, then smiled. Then the look on his face changed to a sly one and said, so, do wanna do something since we're alone? Pooh. Kushina's face got redder, and she couldn't help but say, so something. Well, you live in my house, don't you think you should pay me back by doing something for me? Suddenly whirlpools appeared in her eyes, and smoke came out of her head, and Naito couldn't help but laugh at her. Agh. Kushina could no longer keep this conversation, so she couldn't help but turn her back to him. Upon seeing this, Naito smiled. After waiting for a long time, Kushina didn't feel any movements from Naito, and suddenly she got really worried. She feared that this was another dream, and couldn't help but to turn around really fast. But as soon as she turned around, she got shocked by how much Naito's face was close to her. Kushina suddenly took a step back, while Naito took a dumb stance and pointed his finger straight at her, saying, ha ha ha, as I thought you couldn't hold yourself from kissing this handsome guy. Kushina suddenly became really angry. She clenched her small fist and rushed directly toward Naito. Suddenly that sorrow in her heart disappeared, and everything turned back to what it was. After a while of playfulness, Kushina finally calmed down and went straight to the kitchen after Naito begged her to cook something for him. Naito really missed these days, where Kushina was preparing his lunch every day, without mentioning that her food was delicious. Maybe it wasn't that good at first, but she worked very hard to learn. After eating, Naito didn't try to do anything else, he just wanted to stay with her. The time passed really fast. During this time, the entire village was in chaos, the shinobis were sweeping the whole place up and down. Whether it was Sarutobi, the Anbu, or even the civilians, they were all in shock. The reason behind this was a small message. Konoha's Ashura. Come back. Just a while ago his death was certain, they even made him a monument, which made everyone feel shocked. After hearing this news, even Minato was shocked, but he couldn't help but smile. After all, Naito was a ninja could never be surpassed. Tsunade got the news, and rushed directly into Naito's home. She didn't care about the fact that Kushina should be with him right now, she only wanted to beat him up. Naito helplessly discovered how the girls in his life are all violent. However, this time, Kushina stopped Tsunade. At first she had those crazy eyes, but the moment she saw him, Tsunade felt really happy. Naito was really happy she stopped. The only girl he cannot play carelessly with is Tsunade. Fortunately, Kushina managed to talk some sense into her. After she stopped her, they resumed the normal talks. Otherwise, once she has those crazy eyes, she won't stop before the whole village is smashed. Some people were really happy, and of course, others weren't happy. The Uchiha clan were really angry about this news. The vibes around the room where the clan's elders were gathering was really horrifying. Why didn't you just die? Why is that damn guy is not dead? All of them had those red and bloody eyes as they were talking about Naito's return. Danza was leading his root ninjas to hide in a mountain somewhere between the rock and the cloud borders. The two villages want to talk, and Danza is secretly planning on ruining this joint discussion. If something happens to the team that the clouds sent on the way, the rock will be the ones who will get the blames for this. Even if we couldn't destroy them completely, they will still blame the rocks for this, so we need to dress up like the rock's shinobis. Danza looked at his ninjas, then he snorted as he had a really cold stare in his eyes. We should use the death of their Hokage to our advantage, we need to keep the war from ending. Having said this, Danza stopped and took a sip of water from a kettle. At that moment, a ninja suddenly rushed over. Danza Dono, urgent information. Naito is not dead, and he returned to Konoha. Dang dang. This was the sound of the kettle falling down on the ground. Danza looked very confused while the expression of the root ninjas was cold as always looking at this scene. The news kept spreading through the village, then throughout the land of fire, then finally it reached the entire world. The speed of its spreading was horrifying. In almost no time, the whole world heard about this news. This news overturned the conclusion of everyone. Naito wasn't dead after all, which shocked a lot of people, including the Mitsukage and the Sashikage. Naito didn't just end up dying fighting the Hokage, but he killed him and survived. He killed a Kage before, but everyone convinced themselves that it was just luck and the Kage was just weak. But now he killed the second, which can no longer be considered as luck. There's only one explanation for this. That is, Naito is very strong, very powerful, and almost invincible. When this news spread, on the top of Konoha's Ashura, Naito gradually got a second title, the God of Shinobi. T/N, Japanese, Shinobi no Kami, God of Shinobi / English TV, the Supreme Shinobi. Gods are the supreme natures, and they couldn't find any other word to describe a guy like Naito but to call him a god. Hanzo was once the man that has been called a demigod, but Naito showed that he was stronger, and has surpassed him. As for Hanzo, After he got the news, he also looked stunned. Finally, he took a deep breath, and revealed a bizarre look in his eyes. He once fought against Naito, a few years ago. The former was strong, but he absolutely did not have such power. If the three Sanins weren't there to help, Hanzo is sure he could kill Naito. But now, Naito is much stronger, which gave him a horrible feeling. Perhaps if they fight again, Naito will be able to beat him, and even kill him. Konoha's ninjas are always difficult to deal with. Hidden in some place in the land of rain, he looked to the direction of the land of fire. These words were also the words that the other Hokages said. With the news of Naito's return, the land of fire began to look strong again. None of the other villages had the intention to try their luck with them again. All of them asked for a peaceful meeting, and paid a high price to the land of fire to finally calm down the war. In the second part of this war, the eyes of the entire world were on the resources that the land of fire gain. The three major lands of wind, lightning, and earth were all biting their teeth. Even the land of water looked like they can't wait to grab a bite of it. However, the power of Konoha was deterring them, and especially the existence of Naito, coupled with the loss they suffered in this war, made them with no choice but to have a peace talk and pay a heavy price to the land of fire. After that, they entered a short period of rest and recuperation. This was the end of the Second World War, but it wasn't the end of Naito. Actually, he got very famous in this period, and gained two nicknames: Konoha's Ashura, the demigod of war, and the Supreme Shinobi. T/N, Japanese, Shinobi no Kami, God of Shinobi / English TV, the Supreme Shinobi. Since the Warring States period, there has been only two persons who were hailed as the God of Shinobi for their unmatched ninja prowess, and it was the first Hokage and the founder of Konoha, and the third Hokage, the Professor Hiruzen Sarutobi. Although Naito has made great achievements so far, in the hearts of countless people, he was still uncomparable to Sanju Hachirama, and he has a long way to go before he catches up to him. Others think that he will never surpass Hachirama, even though Naito was still very young. The people who know exactly what Hachirama was capable of, believe that he was an actual god. Naito wasn't convinced of these evaluations. And he doesn't care about these kinds of things, or what people think of him. He just wants to walk his own path. World War II was finally over. However, its end was also the beginning of something greater. Naito knew for sure, even with him being around, the three major villages who suffered such a big loss will never be quiet forever. They will always try to rise again. Without mentioning that Uchiha Madara was sitting in the dark trying to control everything, and also Danza, who will do anything to ignite the fuse of the next war. There's also Nagato, the Rinnegan, Obito, Pain. Therefore for Naito, this was just the beginning. Night. Kushina was holding the blanket, looking innocently at Naito with her cute little face. Although they were a little bit too young to live together, neither of them had parent, so there were no such restrictions. Naito was sure that Danza will do something to interfere with them since Kushina was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, but the former didn't do anything so far. Even Sarutobi didn't disturb Naito in this whole time with his long speeches. "Come on, stop staring at me, I can't sleep like this." Naito yawned while lying there lazily. With reddish cheeks, Kushina looked at him and said, "Then what are you doing lying down next to me? Go sleep on the floor." "Why? This is my home." Naito looked slyly at her, and the blush on Kushina's face became more and more obvious. Kushina kept quiet for a moment, then she squeezed out a sentence. "You're smelly, go take a shower." Augh. After he shrugged his shoulders, Naito flashed to the bathroom, and within a short while, he flashed back again and lay back on the bed. Kushina didn't try to run away, but she covered her head with the blanket. After she waited for a long time, she couldn't feel any kind of movement from Naito's side. She carefully removed the blanket to find out that Naito has already fallen asleep. She kept looking at him for a while until she eventually fell asleep too. After she slept, Naito opened his eyes again. Watching her sleepy face draw a smile on his face. Kushina was still looking like a small girl. On the other hand, Naito looked like if he was 20 years old young man. After he kept looking at her for a while, Naito walked out of his bed and ran to the root and lay down there. He couldn't fall asleep. So he decided to practice for a while. As time went by, the two of them kept living together. Although Kushina will often encounter some embarrassing situations, the two of them lived happily together. Naito's training has once again entered a period of stagnation. It's not that Naito has forgotten to practice, he was training as hard as before, but there was no great progression. To be accurate, Naito's body is just so strong, that regular training no more has an effect on him. The only effective thing is the third stage, but the environment of the Land of Fire wasn't as good as the lightning. Naito's clothes were full of extra weights, but doing those simple squats and punches were no more useful. When it comes to adding and reducing weights, the first thing that crosses Naito's mind is the third Sushikijonaki. In addition to his dust release, he had two more great earth release techniques. The first is the lightweight rock technique, and the second is added weight rock technique. The former can reduce the weight of the object. The Sushikage mastered this simple technique to an extreme degree where it can make him even fly. He could even make a more enhanced version of this technique, the ultra-lightweight rock, and use it in the original to stop Madara's meteorites. Contrary to its counterpart, is the increasing weight, which makes an ordinary rock boxing technique dozens of times stronger. Naito wasn't interested in reducing the weight of things, he could achieve the effect of flying if he could reach Guy's level. But adding weight was what Naito is looking for, he could use it to assist him in his training. However, these two ninjutsu weren't easy to get, it seemed that only a few people learned it in the original. Naito couldn't find the scrolls of these two techniques in Konoha, and even if they had it, they would never give it to him. Should I go to the rock village too? But I still don't want to leave Kushina. Naito frowned. The main problem is that these two ninjutsu are earth releases. He doesn't have that chakra property. And it's not that easy to master it, and came out with a way to discover these two techniques by himself. At this time, Naito suddenly thought of a person. Orochimaru. Since he had before the second stage and gave to Naito, Orochimaru won't mind getting two more ninjutsu for him. Originally, Naito will never want to come into contact with Orochimaru. On the one hand, Naito feels really disgusted by the way Orochimaru behaves, on the other, Naito never understood him. Still, Naito has no fear of Orochimaru. The strength gap is just too big. Even if Orochimaru got stronger, it's impossible for him to be an opponent for Naito. Naito's shock force has become more overwhelming, it's currently the strongest bloodline limit in the world. Moreover, Naito's spiritual shock grows strong, and his immunity to genjutsu also continues to increase. If Orochimaru tries to cross his sword with him, it will only be his end. Every ninja has his own weaknesses, there's nothing perfect in this world, but this sentence doesn't apply to Naito, his power doesn't even belong to his world. The more he gets stronger, Naito becomes closer and closer to perfection. Inside a dark underground base, Naito walked quietly into the hall. The whole place was surrounded by rock walls, and it felt like if it was natural. After a while, there was a light in front. A figure was standing there, waiting for the Naito's arrival, revealing a slightly wicked smile. "It's really surprising that you have time to come to my base." The expression on Orochimaru's face was as always impossible to be read. "So am not welcomed." Naito looked at Orochimaru with a faint reflection. Orochimaru smiled and said, "Of course not, you're my guest, and you're certainly welcome, please follow me." He said this and turned sideways in a gesture of advancing. Upon seeing this, Naito glanced calmly then walked to Orochimaru's lab. The place was very big, but with Naito's ultra-perceive he could sense everything. Naito wasn't interested in most of the experiments in the lab. The only thing he was interested in was Orochimaru's researches on the soul. The researches on the soul have gradually occupied most of Orochimaru's time and gradually became his main task. Orochimaru has begun to explore the creation of the Edo Tensei. "This is for you." After looking around, Naito took out a scroll and threw it to Orochimaru. The former caught it while he was always sticking out his tongue in a weird way. After opening it, Orochimaru suddenly widened his eyes slightly, then he smiled at Naito. Naito wasn't sure if he was happy or not. No matter what is the situation, his smile always looks evil. As I expected, the third stage uses the natural force of the outside world to enhance the user's lightning property. This is closely related to some of my body modification experiments. Orochimaru closed the scroll then swallowed it and looked at Naito again. There's no doubt that what Naito has just given him is the secrets of the third stage. Orochimaru was the one who gave him the scroll of the second stage, and now Naito gave him the third. He didn't think it will be very useful to him, but from his tone, it seems he's interested in it. "What was your purpose behind giving me that scroll before?" Naito asked him directly. He was too lazy to play mind games with Orochimaru. "Well," Orochimaru smiled then said, "some people didn't want you to get it, I didn't like that, and I didn't like to stay neutral. Now that I think about it, my approach wasn't wrong after all. With the scroll you brought to me, you helped me more than I helped you before." Orochimaru laughed inexplicably, but after he talked with him for a while, Naito started to get used to it. But to think that Orochimaru will be this grateful to Naito for bringing him this scroll surprised him a little bit. After all, the lightning armor is not suitable to Orochimaru's style. "Do you need it for your experiments?" "Of course." Orochimaru smiled then he suddenly walked to a room. Naito raised one brow slightly then he followed him. Orochimaru was capturing some ordinary people and enemies from other villages in this room. It seemed that Orochimaru didn't start doing experiments on Konoha's Shinobi's yet. After all, he had a great opportunity during the war to catch these people. At the end of this room, there was another door leading to another place where he was doing some other tests on animals. I don't know if Naito-san has heard about it. There's another energy in this world different to the one that the ninjas are using. Orochimaru's sentence has almost let Naito blurt it out. Natural energy. At the same time, Naito was a little bit surprised that Orochimaru was interested in natural energy this early, although he never managed to learn how to use it. Mount Myoboku, Ryuchi Cave, and Shikotsu Forest, these three places have their own sacred techniques, and they all were mentioned in the original, although the Shikotsu Forest has been kept unexplored. During the Fourth World War, Kabuto managed to learn natural energy and surpassed Orochimaru. However, Naito estimated that Orochimaru couldn't reach the level that allows him to do the transformation because his body was weak after his hands were sealed by the third. Without mentioning that changing his body has also weakened his soul. In fact, Regarding the Sage Mode, Naito has thought a lot about it. He believes that after he opens the 5th gate, it will be necessary for him to learn it before he could open the 6th. Now his amount of chakra is still not up to the standards to practice the Sage Mode. But Naito didn't expect that Orochimaru knew about it this early. Natural energy, Sage Mode. This simple sentence let Orochimaru instantly widen his eyes while revealing a very amazed expression. Although it was just a simple sentence, it made Orochimaru feels that maybe Naito know more about this than him. But he felt like he needed to test him first. It seems that you know very well about this, Naito. After he shrugged his shoulders, Orochimaru suddenly turned and opened his hands, then said, "In this case, let me tell you more about it. This is the experiment that I care most about. Even if the body cultivates the Sage Mode, even if it's transformed with the natural energy, the body will eventually age and die, but not the soul. The human soul is immortal. However, the soul alone cannot survive, it will always need a vessel. That's why I'm more focused on studying the connection and the roots between the soul and the vessel." Having said this, Orochimaru stopped to observe the changes in Naito's expression. What disappointed him is that Naito's expression never changed. Even when he said the words aging and immortal, he didn't show any traces of surprise. But in fact, Naito was quite surprised. He wasn't surprised about the information Orochimaru has shared. As a passerby, Naito knew from the start the Orochimaru will develop a similar technique. What surprised Naito was the fact that Orochimaru has shared this information with him. However, he estimated that Orochimaru has just begun his study on this technique. There's nothing to be prepared for, and Naito wasn't interested in changing his body. Only the immortality of Kaguya Otsutsuki is truly perfect. What you mean is no matter how strong the body is, it will eventually perish. Only the soul is strong enough to remain, right? Naito looked at Orochimaru and said, "That is, the strength of the soul is more important than the strength of the body. It's only half right." Orochimaru nodded lightly and said, "The power of the soul is important, but even a powerful soul cannot exist alone." But, speaking of this, Orochimaru revealed a strange expression. Looking at Naito, he suddenly smiled. "You, Naito, you're really interested about strengthening the soul. After all, the soul is essential." "Yes." Naito nodded but didn't share his own thoughts. After all, knowing Orochimaru and his wide intelligence, there's no way that he doesn't know that Naito has come in touch with Kaito to teach him how to use the spiritual transformation. And since he obviously doesn't need such a technique to attack, he can simply conclude that he's using it to strengthen his soul. He. I can see that you're not interested in being immortal. Your idea is to grasp the present and create the strongest one possible out of yourself. Orochimaru smiled, then looked at Naito. "Lucky for you, strengthening the soul happened to be one of my main subject. And how can I say it, studying it has cost me a lot of time and effort. What do you want in exchange?" Naito looked calmly at Orochimaru. "Cooperation." Orochimaru rushed fast toward Naito and came really close to him, then said, "See, I'm always busy doing these experiments. Studying the body is consuming all of my time. But sometimes I need to stop the experiments to get some special things. From now on, you will get those things to me." Listening to Orochimaru, Naito suddenly smiled, then laughed a little after that. "Orochimaru, from where does this all confidence come from?" Whoosh! Suddenly, Naito disappeared, and rushed directly to Orochimaru's back, while he was pointing his sword on the former's shoulder. The speed of this movement made Orochimaru's eyes widen, while the cold sweat appeared on his forehead. "So fast. You and me, can we really establish a partnership? Holding his Kusanagi sword, Naito touched Orochimaru's shoulder slightly, while Orochimaru kept standing calmly without making the slightest of movement. If Orochimaru were as strong as the original, Naito would have accepted the cooperation between the two of them. But the current Orochimaru was still too weak compared to Naito. If the gap between the two is too great, the word cooperation cannot be used. Moreover, Orochimaru is too selfish, and he will eventually try to control everything. I have what you need. Orochimaru turned slowly toward Naito while his tone was still calm. But Naito could tell from his expression that he was still stunned from his speed. With this kind of speed, he may not even be able to cast a ninjutsu. Naito currently looks more and more like the legends, Uchiha Madara, and Senju Hashirama. Naito didn't recover his sword yet, he was still pointing it toward Orochimaru. You will give it to me. But it's not completed yet, even if you take it, it won't help you much. Listening to Orochimaru, Naito stared at him for a while, then he took back his sword. Orochimaru was finally relieved. He discovered at this time that his thoughts about Naito were absolutely wrong. Naito is not the kind of person that will let people manipulate him. He's a dangerous man, even more dangerous than Danzo and Sarutobi. He didn't feel it before. For the sake of his experiments, Orochimaru thought that he could face anything and everything, but now in the face of Naito, he must be cautious, too cautious. You can ask for two things. After the Kusanagi sword disappeared in the smoke, he looked back at Orochimaru calmly. Two things. Orochimaru looked a little bit surprised. Naito is already asking him for too much. And judging from Naito's tone, it seems that there's more. In addition to the need of your studies on strengthening the soul, I also need an earth release ninjutsu, the added weight rock technique. If you can bring it to me, then you can ask for two things. Naito looked calmly at Orochimaru as he proposed a simple equivalent exchange. As long as Orochimaru doesn't do anything, and respect Naito, the former will also treat him with respect. That's Naito's rule. The added weight rock technique. That's good. If it were the lightweight rock technique, I wouldn't have it here. I studied that technique before. So I got it. Orochimaru was curious about the reason that Naito needed this technique for, but with no more questions, he just gave it to Naito. After that, Orochimaru didn't say what he needed back for his services. Maybe he just didn't need anything for now. Therefore, Naito turned and left. After he got the added weight rock technique from Orochimaru, Naito returned and began to practice the earth property. In general, it's really hard to learn all properties. The third Hokage Sarutobi managed to master all 5 of them, so he deserved to be named the professor. It seems simple, but it's a really long way to master all of them. Fortunately, Naito's control over chakra is extremely powerful. Therefore, Naito's talent in ninjutsu is really stronger than others, which is another advantage of the reverse Hakemon Tonku. It's a pity that Naito tried to help Tsunade to open the reverse Hakemon Tonku, but failed. Those who don't have the earthquake release cannot succeed, even if it's Tsunade. If Tsunade didn't master the reserve seal, she would have been seriously injured in the process. After spending a week of hard training, Naito successfully cultivated the earth property. After that, he spent another to master it. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to do such a thing in a month. Even if they practice it for even half a year, they will not be able to master chakra property that they are not born to have. But for Naito, he still felt that the process was too slow. Although during this 1.5 month period, Naito didn't forget to do his physical training along with the practice of the new chakra property, the effect was almost zero. This made Naito determine that he should focus on the added weight technique in order to resume his physical training. Even if it takes a half year or even 1 year, it's worthwhile. Otherwise, continuing his physical training will do him nothing even if he keeps doing them every day for a year. The practicing of the added weight technique has really taken a lot of Naito's time. Naito started to have doubts. He really doesn't want to leave Kushina anymore, but if this continues, he will need to take half a year out of his time and go to the Land of Lightning so he could practice the third stage more. Obviously, the effect will be better. However, after he successfully cultivated the technique, the effect was really astonishing. Earth release, added weight technique. Boom! Naito's body, which was standing on a hard rock wall, suddenly sank, and instantly the added weight he cast on himself made the rock wall under his feet crush and crack. However, even with adding this weight, Naito didn't look uncomfortable. He instead stretched his body casually, then began to do simple kicks and punches. This technique directly increases the gravity on the subjects, which is much better than the effect of carrying weights. Carrying weights does an unbalanced effect on the body when it's full, but the gravity applied by this technique is very balanced, and can also be adjusted according to the amount of the chakra. It's as if you're carrying a gravity room with you. If you think about it, no one in the whole world has used the added weight technique to assist them in doing physical training. Of course, not a lot of people can withstand such training, only the like of Mato Dai can. Without mentioning that all of the people who are specialized in taijutsu are not very good ninjutsu users. After all, these people have limited chakra and usually have problems with controlling it. Moreover, there's the typical example of Mato Dai, who cannot cultivate chakra, therefore, using this way is impossible for him, but it appears in Naito. With this technique, Naito's progress has once again improved, and since the gravity can be adjusted, Naito's body strength was getting stronger every day. Whenever his body adapts to a level of gravity, Naito increases the amount of the chakra, which increases the power of the technique of adding weight. In this way, Naito's path toward opening the fifth gate step by step was coming to an end. Konoha, the Uchiha clan area. It has been almost a year since the end of the Second World War. Various conflicts have been sorted out. It can be said that the war this time is completely over. Only some small villages such as the rain are still causing some problems. The situation has finally calmed down. Uchiha Kageyama walked to the window and looked outside. It was raining. The atmosphere was extremely dull as the dark clouds were filling the sky. Unexpectedly, the Hokage is not disturbing us no more. Kageyama whispered these words, while there was a ninja behind him bending a knee. He was an elite ninja from the Uchiha and a member of Konoha military police force. Perhaps they are thinking of using us to balance the situation after the reappearing of Naito. After all, he's giving them more problems than us. The ninja stood up and responded to Kageyama. Kageyama nodded gently, then slightly ridiculed and said, "Yes, now they're acting as if we're important to them. However, to think that they will need us to help them with Naito's issue, ha ha ha. Life can be really ironic." After hearing this sentence, the ninja looked confused. He said, "Then what are we gonna do?" Kageyama slowly walked over to his table, then gently picked up a black box while he had a strange expression. "No, you're not wrong. Konoha wants us to keep an eye on Naito. But we won't do that anymore. Now that the war is over, we need to do something about him. No one will like watching him grow any more than this." Having said this, Kageyama looked at the black box in his hand, then said to the ninja, "This is for you. Use it to kill Naito. Konoha won't mind it." "Killing you, Naito?" The ninja was shocked. Even though he was a member of the Uchiha clan and one of the team leaders of Konoha military police force, he still got shocked by this sentence. Who do you think Naito is? He's the man who killed the third Hokage. The guy is invincible. Is killing him even possible? However, just after he opened the box, he got stunned, then the expression on his face became a little more scared. This is... Yes. Kijiyama sat on his chair and took a sip out of a cup of tea on his table, then said, one of the few legacies in our clan, so don't let me down. Yes sir. Uchiha Rin nodded with an excited look on his face. He respectfully bowed to Kijiyama, then he turned and left. Kijiyama kept watching him leaving, then put down the cup on the table and looked up to the ceiling. Although it's a legacy, the cost of using it is too great. Rin, your existence after this will affect Fugaku's eligibility of being the next head of the clan. However, after killing Naito, you can enjoy a lifetime of being the hero of the Uchiha clan. Having said that, Kigami stood up, and a smug grin appeared on his face. This was the close feeling of glory. Another calm day. Konoha was always full of life, and the streets were crowded with noisy people. From time to time, ninjas will leap over the heads of the civilians and disappear again. But the people have got used to this. After eating his breakfast, Naito walked out of his house. Remember to come back for launch. Otherwise, I will come and find you. Kushina stood at the door and waved to Naito as he was leaving. After he nodded gently back to her, he suddenly flashed and disappeared. Once again, Naito came to the back hills of Konoha. It's basically always an empty area, no one will come here, and even if they did, they would just leave after seeing Naito training there. People really respect hard workers like Naito. Naito is already so powerful, yet he never slacked off, he still practices as hard as before. Of course, they don't know the reasons behind his hard training. The Third War may not cause any turbulence in the world, but Madara will definitely set up his plan during the period of the Third War. Although Madara doesn't have much power in him, Naito couldn't ignore his existence. Boom! Boom! The ground under Naito's feet got cracked. Naito was sweating as if he was standing under the rain, his muscles were trembling, and every cell in his body seemed as if it was getting drawn by the gravity, which means, every single cell in his body was getting stronger. Ha! Finally, Naito cancelled the added weight technique and looked at the sky. Unconsciously, it was noon. Well, it's time to go back to dinner. Naito suddenly saw Kushina walking toward him with an angry expression, and she seemed to be carrying a box of rice. The moment he saw her, Naito's expression became strange. Rubbing his eyes, Naito showed a hint of confusion. The moment she reached him, Naito tried to grab her hand. Suddenly, the Kusanagi sword appeared in his hand and swept through her body. The expression on Kushina's face didn't change, she kept her smile as her blood was splashing the ground. Suddenly her figure turned into a shadow and disappeared right in front of Naito's eyes. The moment he saw her, Naito felt that something was wrong. He couldn't sense her with his ultra-perceive. He could see her with his eyes, but he couldn't sense her. Is this a genjutsu? Who's using it? Naito wrinkled his brows. It's really strange that someone managed actually to catch Naito in his genjutsu without him even noticing. Naito looked around him, then he started applying his shock force into his body to get out of this genjutsu. When it was clear that this trick won't work again on him, a person came to the front of Naito. Konoha's Ashura, it's really true that you're immune to genjutsu. Uchiha Rin looked calmly at Naito with his black-colored eyes. The former wasn't activating his Sharingan. Naito frowned the moment he saw him. Although he was frowning, Naito didn't have any fear for him, but with a serious tone he asked, "Who are you, and what are you trying to do?" Konoha military force members weren't all famous, but Naito could recognize this one. He was one of their leaders, one of the Uchiha clan, which made him very angry. In fact, Naito didn't care about the Uchiha, he actually was too lazy even to care. "It seems really necessary to teach you guys a good lesson about not disturbing me anymore." Rin's heart was shaking from fear, but the expression on his face remained calm. Looking indifferently at Naito, he said, "I am Uchiha Rin, and I am here to kill you." "Kill me?" After a little sigh, Naito couldn't help but laugh. "Is this a dream talking?" Laugh. Suddenly, Naito moved his sword, and the guy in front of him got instantly cut. However, the two halves of Rin who were cut off, strangely transformed and turned into two separate bodies. The two identical bodies looked at Naito with a hint of mockery and disdain in their eyelids, as if they were overlooking the sky, and said in two voices, "Is it strange? Do you doubt it? Do you think you can't get caught in genjutsu? But why is that? Is it strange? Do you doubt it? Do you think you can't get caught in genjutsu? But why is that?" The two bodies looked at each other, then with a cold stare on their face they said, "You're too small to see the great of the Uchiha clan, even the one that you are now. In the face of the Uchiha clan, you're just an ant. You're too small to see the great of the Uchiha clan, even the one that you are now. In the face of the Uchiha clan, you're just an ant." Naito looked calmly at the two bodies in front of him while trying to find an explanation for this. Obviously, he's immune to genjutsu. Still, he was sure that this Uchiha guy in front of him is not using a clone technique. Moreover, this situation is the same as the previous one with Kushina. He can see it with his eyes, but he ultimately can't sense it with his ultra-perceive. Whoosh! Suddenly, the two figures rushed toward Naito and pulled out their swords at the same time and waved at Naito. Naito stood still, letting these two swords hit his body, but there weren't any kind of injuries at his body, as if he didn't get hit in the first place. Obviously, they are just shadows. "So you can see that I am just an illusion. But the reality is not as simple as that. So you can see that I am just an illusion. But the reality is not as simple as that." At the same time, the two figures turned and looked at Naito, and once again they swayed their swords toward Naito. This time, it was completely different. This time they were revealing their killing intent. In the face of the two swords coming toward him, Naito extended his hand slightly, revealing a strange look in his eyes. Then he held tight the Kusanagi sword that was appeared from the smoke and waved it horizontally. Whoosh! This time, it was eye to eye. Naito could tell that this attack was real from the chakra flowing in the two swords, which made him block it with his sword. And if he can block him, it means he can also attack him. Whoosh! Suddenly, Naito waved his sword and swept it over, cutting the Rin's two bodies. However, the two bodies turned into four. "You don't understand. Don't you?" One of the bodies looked at Naito, and said, "This is not a genjutsu, it can launch a real attack, even if you're strong enough to kill the Raikage." The other Rin in front looked at him and said, "In front of me, you're gonna die." Listening to these words, Naito didn't respond and started to think about an explanation. Naito was sure that these bodies in front of him are not clones, and since he couldn't sense them with his ultra-perceive, they shouldn't be genjutsu. Moreover, Rin has never opened his Sharingan. However, it's undoubtedly a Mangekyo Sharingan ability. Genjutsu? No, it's certainly not a genjutsu. Suddenly, Naito rushed toward Rin. Boom! Under the overwhelming power of Naito's shock force, the four bodies suddenly got smashed into countless pieces. However, those pieces in an instant turned into countless clones of Rin all over the mountain. This scene seemed like a one from the original when Naito uses his shadow clone technique. All of them had ridiculous expressions on their faces as they rushed at once toward Naito. In the face of this scene, Naito shook his head while his body stood motionless. Whoosh! Without even moving an inch, Naito sent an invisible spiritual shock in all directions. For a moment, it looked as if the Shinigami himself was reaping their souls as their bodies were crushing apart. In a faraway place, behind a tree, Uchiha Rin was standing there, with cold sweat on his forehead. What an attack ability he has! But with these eyes, I can still. Off! Suddenly Rin put his hand on his forehead and screamed in pain. His left eye was dripping blood, but these eyes didn't have three tomo, it actually looked like a strange form of a Mangekyou Sharingan. So these are side effects of using someone else's eyes. Rin gnawed his teeth and tried to resist the pain while he looked like he understood a lot of things, but there was no going back now. Rin could only continue what he already started. In the distance, Naito managed to destroy all of Rin's bodies while the spiritual shock continued on spreading around. However, he couldn't find Rin anywhere, he should be hiding far away. At the next moment, Naito decided on focusing on the original Rin. In just an instant, the whole world around Naito turned into darkness, and he could no longer see anything. Suddenly, he could hear Rin's breaths from the darkness, but he still couldn't determine Rin's position. You should give up, it's not a genjutsu, I'm not controlling your vision. I'm actually controlling the world around you, my ability allows me to control the light and create an illusion that cannot be cracked, even if you know it's fake, you cannot break it. Because I can also control the light to condense and launch a real attack. Rin's voice was coming from various directions, even Naito couldn't determine his position from his voice only. However, Naito's Ultra Perceive wasn't limited to vision and hearing only. He could sense killing intent from one of those directions. Naito could sense it for just 1 second, then it disappeared again. But that 1 second was more than enough for Naito. Suddenly, he also disappeared. Whoosh! Suddenly, Rin, who was ready to relaunch his shadows, looked at his chest to find Naito's sword there inserted through his body. Is it now? Naito gently releases his hands from the sheath. Rin looked stunned at the sword, as if he was in disbelief. Suddenly, the blood squirted out of his wound. His eyes revealed the pain he was feeling as the blood continued to overflow. The look on his face was incredible. How can this be? This is impossible. You're controlling the light, and I shouldn't be able to see anything, right? Naito looked at him calmly and said these words. Vision. Hearing. These things don't matter to Naito. With his Ultra Perceive, he has almost pure physical induction. Perhaps this technique can even be effective on people who have Sharingan, but it's completely worthless against him. Before he found Rin, the former thought that Naito was utterly in the darkness, so he dared to sway into his perception. You should have never done that, killing you only takes a moment. Naito looked directly into his eyes. He didn't care that he had a Mangekyou Sharingan, because this was the end to him. Rin could no longer stand still and fell on the ground, while his eyes looked still in disbelief. You Naito. Is he also a perceptive ninja? Moreover, Rin was really far from him. How did he manage to perceive his existence? Rin extended his hand toward Naito as if he wanted to cast something, but in the end, his whole body fell into the pool of blood. Before he died, Rin's heart sank in despair. There are a lot of people who are stronger than him in this world, but only Naito gives him the feeling that he cannot even look at him. Everything seemed to be perfect a moment ago. If you want to kill this man, you need to be a beast just like him. Otherwise, it's impossible. Looking at Rin's corpse in front of him, Naito couldn't help but feel that something was strange about him. He took back his sword and looked slightly at his body. This guy is not famous. People who manage to awake their Mangekyou Sharingan should be absolutely famous, but not this guy. These eyes. Something is weird about them. Although Uchiha Rin is infamous, he's also a little bit known, but this didn't made any difference to Naito. After he thought about it for a while, Naito looked at Rin's corpse sharply. These eyes are not his. No wonder that he needed to stop attacking him. The side effect should be far higher than usual. This didn't happen accidentally, someone has given it to him, but even if he's an Uchiha, he couldn't bear the side effects. So these are the so-called eyes of the Uchiha that can decipher the stone tablet, but to think they will lose it like this, I don't think they would be this fool. At that moment Naito fully understood the whole thing. The Uchiha clan has existed since the Warring States period. It's unknown how long they lived, but there will always be people like Uchiha Madara and Izuna who will awaken their Mangekyou Sharingans. Although no one after Madara managed to awake the Eternal, the people who once opened the Mangekyou, their eyes will never disappear with death. Those who didn't get completely blind before their deaths, the Uchiha clan will take their eyes and keep it, so they can transfer it later to an elite member, but since it's not their original eyes, even an Uchiha wouldn't bear the side effects of using it. However, the use of these eyes for a short period can gain enormous abilities. They can even create a pair of Kage levels Shinobis with the use of a few of these eyes. Perhaps that's how they dared to betray Konoha in the original. It's a bit interesting that the Uchiha clan are willing to sacrifice a pair of these eyes just to kill me. Naito took out Rin's eyes with a hint of mockery in his eyes, then he stood up and sealed them in a scroll he was carrying. Naito wasn't interested in transferring them. Even an Uchiha family couldn't bear its side effects, and the abilities of this Mangekyou Sharingan weren't really worth it. Controlling light, and making illusions. Naito didn't care about these things. Maybe because Rin couldn't use it probably, if it were giving to someone else who can use it better, even killing Sarutobi wouldn't be impossible, but it doesn't make a threat to Naito. Maybe because they thought that with these eyes they can kill Sarutobi, they will also have a chance of killing Naito. I tried not to care about you, but you are really seeking your deaths. Naito flashed and came to the top of the mountain. From there, he gazed at the distance of the village looking for the Uchiha area. After he stretched his body, Naito slightly shook his head and finally decided to open the fifth gate before he has a chat with the Uchiha clan. He could wait a little bit more before he opens the fifth gate since it was only one step away, but he decided to go for it now. The Uchiha resident. During this time, it was really calm in the clan, but it was just the calm before the storm. Because Kageyama's son, Uchiha Fugaku, has been promoted to a Jonin, and it was a matter of time before he becomes the head clan. In Kageyama's office, Fugaku was standing in front of Kageyama with a severe expression, while his eyes were full of faith. I did everything that needs to be done. Kageyama looked at his son and sighed, then he said, in the future, you will become the head of this clan, and its destiny will be in your hand. In fact, Kageyama was 50 years old. Although their physical strength began to reduce at this age, it wasn't that much for him. However, he could tell that Sarutobi and Jiraiya were preparing Minato for the position of the next Hokage. Kijiyama was at the same age as Sarutobi, but his son, Fugaku, was many years older than Minato. After all, his second son Sasuke was at the same age as Naruto, but he had an eldest one, Itachi. Father. You don't need to. Although Fugaku was full of confidence, he couldn't help but feel sorry for his father. Kijiyama waved his hand and interrupted Fugaku. Fugaku, I will prepare everything for you. All that the village wants to see is Naito dead, but you will need to be ready for everything. My resignation of the military police force captain position will be equivalent as a statement to the village that you're the next head of the clan. Hearing these words made Fugaku frown. Compared to Kijiyama, Fugaku was younger but kind of wiser. He couldn't help but say, Father, are you sure you can kill Naito? I can't dare to say yes, but the ability of those eyes is great. Speaking of this, Kijiyama paused and tried to lower his voice, then continued. We have a great chance. The ability of those eyes is specialized for assassination. It was awakened by a hero from our clan, and since then it was kept in the clan for decades just for these kinds of situations. Fugaku was the next head of the Uchiha clan, and he basically understood some of its foundations and knew various secrets. Listening to his father's words, he couldn't help but still feel that it wasn't enough, but his father's confidence made him believe. Whoosh! At this time, a ninja knocked on the door and asked to enter. Kijiyama glanced at the door, then he said, Come in. Kijiyama Dono, something bad happened. We found Rin's corpse in the back hills, and his Sharingan was taken away. What? Without noticing, Kijiyama jumped from his sight, and the cup of tea in his hand fell directly on the table. Dang! The cup rolled twice then finally fell over. The tea flow spread across the table, letting the drops fell on the ground, while the whole room was silent. Fugaku, who was in front of the table, has also stood up. The tea was dropping on his shoes, but he was so shocked that he couldn't even notice. Captain! I have already sent people to check out this matter. This absolutely unforgivable. They didn't just kill Rin, but they also took away his eyes. The ninja on the banded knee looked really angry. There is no doubt that this assassination mission has been planned secretly. Only Fugaku, Rin, and Kijiyama knew about it, even though the high-level people of Konoha were aware of it. The ninja who reported this didn't know that what was taken away weren't just ordinary Sharingan eyes, but Mangekyou Sharingan. Even after he listened to what the ninja in front of him said, Kijiyama didn't say anything back and kept quiet for a long time. Kijiyama didn't know what to say for a long time, then with a slightly embarrassed tone, he said. And what about Naito? You Naito? The ninja seemed confused as he looked at Kijiyama, then he said, Do you mean that Naito is the person behind killing Rin and taking his eyes? How arrogant, how dare he? All right. The expression on Kijiyama's face couldn't be described in words as he interrupted the ninja after taking a very deep breath. Call the investigators back, there's no need to investigate in this matter. Kijiyama stood firm and said this sentence with a serious tone. Listening to Kijiyama's orders, the ninja suddenly looked stunned and didn't react for a while. Are you kidding me? Hurry up, don't question your captain's orders. Fugaku finally saved the ninja's life and said these words to him with a low tone. Although he still looked very confused, the ninja nodded and turned away. The moment he left and closed the door behind him, the expression on Fugaku and Kijiyama's faces changed and became full of hatred. The sun rose on the Hokage rock, and the three carved faces of the Hokages seemed as if they have come alive. If you cross the Hokage Rock you will find the back mountains of the village where some civilians come there to walk, other shinobis will also come there to train. Although the world has entered a brief period of peace after the Second War, some ninjas didn't forget to train every day. There were also some other young ninjas who graduated from the school, and they were full of hope and ambitions. Naito was also there, but the people who were doing actual combat exercises were other shinobis from Konoha. Naito didn't want to disturb them like he doesn't like to be bothered by others during his training. Fortunately, Naito wasn't there to do his physical training, he was just there trying to adapt his body to the new strength. Yes, Naito has finally opened the fifth gate of the reverse Hakemon Tonku. It took him nearly 4 years of effort to open this gate. Today's Naito has passed the 15 years old, and he's nearly 16 years old. The effort he put into opening the fifth gate was beyond his imagination. Naito needed to master the third stage of the lightning armor, and learn a whole new chakra property to master the added weight technique. With a bunch of variety of secretive techniques to assist him with his cultivation, together with hard work that continued for several years, Naito finally opened the fifth gate. In the original, Naruto got really strong at the end. First, he learned the Sage Mode, then he learned how to control the Kyuubi's chakra. Later during the Fourth War Naruto learned the Nine Tails name Kurama and their hearts synchronize and Naruto becomes able to enter Kurama mode which is much stronger. But this wasn't all. In the end, Hagoromo gave Naruto the Six Paths Yang power which made him open the Six Paths Sage Mode. He was only 17 years old at that time. At this rate, when Naito reaches the age of 17, his growth will be fast enough to make a genius out of him like Uchiha Itachi or to even have the same sensation as Madara and Hachirama. But he will never be like Naruto. Therefore, Naito needed to open the fifth gate. He was quite excited about it, but he didn't feel like he was proud of himself. Almost fully adapted, and the chakra is almost adjusted. Naito suddenly opened his eyes and clenched his hand. It was an indescribable feeling, but he could sense the power flowing inside him. Naito felt at that moment that he could smash the whole village with one punch. With this power smashing the Shinra Tensei is no longer a dream. Naito stood up and slightly chuckled. If someone uses his Bakugan to see Naito's chakra pathway system, he will notice that there are 5 shining stars connected to each other. These are 5 out of 8 specific tenketsu in chakra pathway system. Currently, Naito's amount of chakra has grown directly from an ordinary Kage level to 1 step above, or even more. Because Naito's reversed chakra pathway gives him a great recovery speed over his chakra, and opening the fifth gate made it only faster. If he opens the sixth gate, his chakra might even be compared to a one-tailed Baijua. A human that can surpass a Baijua in terms of chakra amount. Since the Warring States era, the only people who could reach this level are Madara and Hachirama. Even the third Raikage didn't reach that level. After all, Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama were the successors of Inda and Ashura. Of course, the increase of Naito's chakra is no longer just about practicing ninjutsu and strengthening his body. The real enhancement was the fifth stage of the shock force. The strength of his shocks is much stronger than before. If he faces the third Raikage again, Naito won't need to condense the power of the shock anymore, he would kill him with just a random punch. Naito doesn't know if he could smash Sasuke's complete Susanoo, but sure he has no fear against any common ones. Even if it's the third stage of Sasuke's Susanoo, Naito feels like he can destroy it. Although he never even faced an Uchiha who can use Susanoo, Naito believed he can. This alone, Naito's strength is enough now to destroy the whole Uchiha clan, no matter what pair of mangekyou they have. Even if it's a godlike technique, Naito is confident that he can fight against it. Yes, he's ready for anything. As Uchiha Itachi said before, even the strongest of opponents always have a weakness. It's just this simple. The Uchiha clan is a trouble, and Naito needs to deal with them. They will always follow the steps of their god, Madara, although he never been called a god by the Uchiha in the original. They sure thought of him as a one, and unless he gets killed by another one, it would be absolutely impossible to change their will directly. The stronger his influence, the strongest their will to follow him, and the harder it will be to change. Naito's strong will is enough to conquer the whole world. After he opened the fifth gate, Naito got surprised when he found that his spiritual strength has also got stronger. It might be related to his body strength. The more he enhances it, the more his soul goes stronger, which increases his spiritual power. But the enhancements Naito has gained weren't limited just to this. In addition to all of this, there's speed. His speed has also improved a lot. Even without using Suru, it was enough to surpass the third Raikage. Naito's original speed is as fast as the Suru before. His current Suru is super fast. That's why he calls it Super Suru now. Once he uses the Super Suru, the third Raikage movement will no longer be considered fast. Even the fourth Raikage won't be able to catch up to Naito's speed. It can be said that even if Naito didn't have the shock force, with his speed alone, he would have been one of the strongest shinobis in the world. Chakra, spiritual strength, and speed. These were the main 3 points that have been strengthened after the opening of the fifth gate, but there was also another thing. The range of his Ultra Perceive. Naito could only see clearly within the range of 1 mile. Then it will become extremely blurred outwards, then it will be dark outside of 3 miles. But now Naito can see clearly even after 3 miles, it won't be dark not until he hit 10 miles. If he had this range before, he would have seen Uchiha Rin coming toward him from miles away. Chakra, spiritual power, speed, and perceptual ability. The improvement of these 4 abilities made Naito gradually close to perfection. Naito couldn't help but look up to the sky. The sky was blue and clear, it looked really beautiful, but Naito's eyes looked intense as if he was gazing at the gates of heaven. At this time, Naito had only one thought in his mind. When he opens all the gates, will he be perfect? Naito was still in Konoha's back hills. After he fully adapted his body to the new power, he stood there for a whole day clueless on how he should train from now on. But Naito didn't stand there doing anything, he was thinking about the future. His next goal is opening the 6th gate, but how he could do that? Naito had only one answer, but it wasn't easy to do. Besides, Naito was thinking about the third Kusanagi sword and how he couldn't find any more information about it. Also, it seems that it's already about time for Uchiha Itachi to be born. There wasn't any news from the Land of Rain. Did Kanon and Yoriko met again with Nagato? Naito thought about all of these things that day. When it got late, Naito returned to his home. On the way back he got a message that made him slightly surprised. He didn't receive this message from anyone, he sensed it with his Ultra Perceive. Tomorrow is the day where Uchiha Fugaku will be designated as the next head of the Uchiha clan. This information was a top secret one, the designation has not been announced, and they didn't invite anyone to witness the event. But not being invited doesn't mean that you can't go, especially if it's someone like you, Naito. Why so soon? Maybe it's not a coincidence, maybe they finally decided to break the silence. At that time there was a smug grin on Naito's face. The assassination they planned before is undoubtedly impossible to get erased that easily, not to mention that wasn't the first time they try to kill Naito. This time, they dared on fixing another head clan, without solving matters first with Naito. Do they think they could always hide behind those Mangekyou Sharingan? Naito didn't know what Kijiyama and his son Fugaku were thinking about. He didn't want to know, and he didn't even bother to know. He only knows one thing, that they will need the next head clan tomorrow so the event can be done successfully. What are you thinking about? Your expression looks weird. Sitting next to Naito, Kushina couldn't help but ask what Naito was thinking about. Naito suddenly looked at her and smiled. When she was somewhat confused, he suddenly pulled her over and kissed her hard. What? After she broke free, her cheeks became red. Then she looked at him and said, "Can't you eat first?" Ha ha ha. Naito continued on smiling, then that smile gradually faded away, and his expression became very serious, and whispered to her, "Kushina, something might happen tomorrow, No matter what, try to stay away and do not interfere." Kushina looked strangely at Naito. She seemed very confused. She wanted to ask him more about it, but Naito smiled again and asked her, "If one day I decided to leave Konoha, will you go with me?" The moment she heard Naito, Kushina felt more worried, but at the same time she didn't ask what happened. She blinked with her beautiful eyes and gently held Naito's hand. She tightly grasped his hand, and looked at Naito in his eyes, and smiled. No words were needed at that moment. A smile got drawn on Naito's face, then he also held her hand tightly and glanced at the window looking at the village. Regardless of Kushina being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, the moment he decided to leave Konoha, she will definitely come with him. Any obstacles after that will be dealt with. The next day. It was a sunny day. The white clouds in the sky were full of harmony. After the end of the second part of the war, almost all of the major villages were in chaos, but not Konoha. On this day, none of the Uchiha members were seen in Konoha. However, the village didn't care about this. They just sent other shinobis to fill their places in the daily patrols. In fact, after the end of the war, the need for the patrols wasn't significant. The whole clan was gathered in Konoha's military police force building. All of them were actually members of the Uchiha clan. None of Konoha's shinobis were there, even the Hokage wasn't invited. Most of these ninjas were jonins, special jonins, and chunins, although only a few of them were chunins, and of course, not all of them had Sharingans. Most of the ninjas who have Sharingan are jonins. None of them will be considered chunin. Unless they're too young, they will be ranked among the jonins. Sharingan is relatively rare in the clan, not to mention the Mangekyou. It seems that since the Madara and Izumi, there were only a few who managed to activate them. Even Kijiyama, who was about to abdicate his position as a head clan, didn't have a Mangekyou Sharingan. The courtyard was huge, and the ninjas from the Uchiha clan were crowded there. In the forefront, there was Fugaku, who was gonna succeed in his position as the head of the Uchiha clan and Konoha's military police force captain. Kijiyama stood there next to him, dressed in a robe with some wrinkles on his face as his expression showed a bit of vicissitude. In comparison, Fugaku looked full of confidence, and his eyes were revealing his strong will. He was confident that he's gonna lead the clan to prosper, and he was ready to eliminate any obstacles gonna stop him from achieving that, including you, Naito. Everyone is here. Looking at the dense crowd below, Kijiyama took the lead with a light tone and a hint of majesty and solemnity. With a hint of respect, the ninja below responded. Everyone arrived. Okay, let's get started. Kijiyama took a deep breath, then smiled at Fugaku. The former looked at him with a touch of joy. Even though the position was already inherited by Fugaku, there will always be dissatisfied people. But Kijiyama was preparing for this from the start, and he was paving the way for Fugaku to succeed as a head clan, so he dispatched those who didn't accept him from their position, and replaced them with others who were obedient to him. Almost all of them were up to the idea, which was perfect. Of course, the top elites of the clan were also nodding. These high elites were the captains of the military police force, and some of the veterans of Kijiyama's era, similar to Konoha's elders. These people were highly ranked among the clan, so they were also standing in the forefront, while the others were standing in the back. Kijiyama started to talk solemnly about his lifelong experience, which drove the atmosphere of the audience and made them all think of how mighty is their clan. In fact, this was true. Although the Senju were not completely destroyed, they were in a really weak position after the Second War. Uchiha Kijiyama, the captain of the military police force, and the head of the Uchiha clan, recommend Uchiha Fugaku as our next leader. Kijiyama said this as he was looking at the elites of the Uchiha clan. In fact, this matter was already decided, they just needed to do this ceremony so it can be all legitimate. The elites looked at each other, then one after another said, "Agree. Agree. Agree." All of them start to agree one after another, and no one objected. The ninjas at the rear have also started to show their excitement. At this point, they can already start to call Fugaku head clan. Fugaku can lead us to the peak of the world. We trust him. Fugaku sensed the atmosphere in the audience and whispered these words to Kijiyama. Kijiyama glanced at the crowd and waited for them until they calmed down. Then he smiled and said, "Since there are no objections, then I should declare Fugaku as the next." I object. Just at the moment where he was about to declare Fugaku as the next head clan, everyone heard a voice suddenly coming from the audience. Kijiyama stood there so angry, glancing with his eyes in the audience, looking at the person who dared to not only interrupt him but even refuse his son as the new head clan. Who is it? Being interrupted at that moment, the person who spoke is sure looking for trouble, which made Kijiyama's heart full of anger. He couldn't help but directly open his Sharingan and gaze into the audience looking for that person who dared to do this. While Kijiyama was burning in rage, all the ninjas present in the crowd were looking at each other in horror. Who dared to object? People start to turn one after another. 1 person. 2. 10. The whole crowd turned around. The lines of sight quickly gathered together at one point, but not in the rear. They were actually looking at someone in the middle of the crowd. When the first person saw the figure of that person, the expression on his face suddenly stagnated. At the same time he froze in his place as if he got petrified. Then the same thing happened to the second, then the third. It seemed as if that person had some kind of magic that make all the people who see him petrified. All of a sudden the silence controlled the place. Even the movements of Kijiyama and Fugaku came to an abrupt end. The silence was terrible, even the sound of breathing seemed to stagnate. You could even hear clearly the sound of a needle falling on the ground. At the center of the crowd, a smirk got drawn on Naito's face, then he repeated that sentence softly. I object. The sound was very light, but at that moment, even though the sky was clear, it seemed as if there was a thunderstorm blew in everyone's ear, letting everyone's mind roar. They couldn't help but show a touch of horror in their expression. You. Naito. You. Why are you here? Kijiyama, who was standing at the end of the crowd, had cold sweat on his forehead the moment he saw Naito. He didn't expect that Naito will come for trouble today. But he really did. You know, even the Uchiha clan wouldn't look for trouble in the middle of the village. Kijiyama suddenly moved his hand as a gesture for Fugaku. Fugaku was also very surprised by the sudden appearance of Naito. He noticed Kijiyama's gesture and nodded as he ordered him to retreat. But before he could even take 2 steps, Naito, who was in the middle of the crowd, flashed and appeared again in front of him. The succession ceremony is not over yet. Where do you think you're going, Mr. Candidate? Naito leaned against the door at the back, with a lazy expression on his face. The ninjas in here were all elites. They have experienced countless bloody battles, but seeing Naito's speed with their own eyes made them feel amazed and at the same time terrified. Kijiyama somehow kept his calm and walked to the front of Fugaku, then looked at Naito and said, "This is the ceremony of the succession of our head clan. An outsider isn't allowed here." "Oh. Is that so? And what if I want to participate?" Naito freely stretched his hand. This simple move pushed both Kijiyama and Fugaku back, which made them feel threatened and opened their Sharingan. However, what made them angrier is that Naito has actually pushed them back, then continued to lean against the door. He doesn't even have any killing intent, he's just like any ordinary person. At that moment, Kijiyama felt high pressure. He knew in his heart that since Naito has shown himself here today, it will be impossible to finish this ceremony today. This should be payback for all the things that happened before. Thinking of this, Kijiyama bitted his teeth with a cold stare on his face. He needed to make an end to this. So what if he's called a god? He's inside the Uchiha territories, all of the clan is gathered here, he's not afraid of Naito. Even if he beat Rin, who had a Mangekyou Sharingan before, he's not afraid, they have an army here. He dared to insult them, and he should die for that. Thinking of this, Kijiyama's heart slowly calmed down, and his killing intent started to spread all over the place. He looked at Naito with a very cold stare. "If you want to intend this hard, you can, but as a dead man. Get ready for hell." Naito was leaning lazily on the door as he was listening to this sentence, but the moment Kijiyama said the last word, he flashed in front of Kijiyama. Then he suddenly put his hand gently on Kijiyama's shoulder. The expression on Kijiyama's face froze for a moment, then he widened his eyes. He knew that Naito has killed the Raikage, but he only read about it in the intelligence, he didn't know how strong he really is. But now he does. He couldn't even follow Naito's movements with his Sharingan. Moreover, even if he could see it, he wouldn't be able to avoid it, he wouldn't be able to keep up to that speed. Crack! In an instant, Naito sent shock force from his hand passing through Kijiyama's body. The expression on Kijiyama's face revealed a hint of pain, and in just a second, and in front of countless ninjas from the Uchiha clan, he suddenly collapsed. Head clan. Captain. Father. In a moment, the horror controlled the hearts of all ninjas in the place. You Naito has actually done it. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, and inside of Konoha, Naito killed the head clan of the Uchiha clan. Hell. Sorry, but I have better things to do, you can go first. Naito leaned toward Kijiyama as he was having his last breaths and whispered these words to him. After he dealt with Kijiyama, the hearts of everyone sunk in horror. After he looked up again, Naito's eyes swept through the audience. Whenever his eyes fell on someone, the last would be soaked in a cold sweat. They couldn't help but feel terrified and angry at the same time. What a shame. He dared to break into their ceremony and kill their head clan. Although he's now the former head clan, he was still one of their people. He dared to despise the Uchiha clan and kill their former head clan. This will never be forgivable. This bastard. Kill him. Even if he's a god, we will kill him together. The ninjas of the Uchiha clan were gnashing their teeth, revealing their murderous intentions. In an instant, their momentum condensed together and the whole place started shaking. This horrible killing intent broke out, and suddenly countless perceptive ninjas in Konoha widened their eyes in horror. What happened? It coming from the Uchiha clan area. Quickly report this back to the Hokage. Under the horror of these ninjas, the message was sent out instantly to the Hokage. Then he sent some of the perceptual ninjas back to figure out what happened. Suddenly, a strange force came along making a strong impact on them, and instantly they felt that their minds are gonna explode and they almost faint out. Their faces were pale, and they were barely standing. What? What's that? Back to the military police force courtyard. The momentum and the killing intent of the ninjas of the Uchiha clan broke out together, targeting Naito, who looked as calm as ever. If any one of them had a Mangekyou Sharingan, it would have made him a little bit interested, but these people are too weak. Even if they joined their forces, they would still be a bunch of ants. Weak, one thought was all that he needed to kill them. Whoosh! Suddenly, a terrible momentum broke out from Naito's inner body. It looked invisible to the naked eye, but you could tell how strong it was from those thick cracks appearing on the ground. Even the door on his back got broken by the impact. Along with that horrible momentum, an invisible spiritual shock flew directly toward the ninjas in the front. This technique cannot be resisted, and its effect is instant. It didn't need more than a second to hit everyone, and make all of their minds blank. Plop! Plop! At that moment, a large number of them could no longer bear it, and one after another, they start falling on the ground. It seemed as if they were getting cut like some wheat, falling into pieces. The scene was incredible. Those who managed to stay still looked stunned, including Fugaku. What kind of power is this? Is this a genjutsu? No. Impossible. There's no way he could cast a genjutsu on such a large range. The people who didn't fall were widening their eyes in disbelief. Even the elites were getting soaked in a cold sweat. How could they face such a person? He's unstoppable. Naito's strong presence made their spirits collapse. Only the elites were barely standing there. With one strike, Naito destroyed the entire Uchiha clan. And he didn't even need to move, he was just standing there. This horrible momentum didn't only destroy them, but it also spread in the entire village. Countless ninjas and civilians looked shocked. Even regular people with no power could feel his terrifying presence in the distance. Not good. This is Naito's momentum, and it's coming from the direction of the Uchiha clan. Some of the fine elite shinobis could tell who's causing this overwhelming force, and this didn't calm them down. Instead, their hearts were shaking from fear. While these people were rushing to the Hokage building to inform him, a figure was flashing in the distance heading toward the Uchiha clan area. Back to the battlefield. The horrible force has finally faded away, leaving only a few people in the field, but Naito looked very bored. Is that it? They dared to attack Naito several times even after he killed the Raikage and been called a god, but now they couldn't even resist a simple attack. Naito wasn't sure if they were stupid or too proud. Being proud to a certain degree is actually stupidity. Naito looked very disappointed as he was preparing to leave. But suddenly he stopped. Hey! Where is? Naito looked very surprised because the moment he turned he didn't find Kijiyama's corpse. The spiritual shock lasted for only a moment. How did Kijiyama's corpse disappear in such a short period? Father. Fugaku, who didn't directly get hit by the spiritual shock, looked at the back of Naito with a surprised expression. Naito looked around looking for him, to find Kijiyama standing in the distance completely fine. No, he wasn't completely fine. Because he was missing one of his eyes. Izonagi. Amazing, if I remember correctly, you need to do a hand sign to cast it. When did you do it? How could you avoid my ultra perceive? Naito looked at Kijiyama, and suddenly he revealed a happy expression. Kijiyama looked like he was prepared something to say, but Naito's words stunned him and made him widen his eyes in horror. This time, Kijiyama was really shocked. Yeah, I know about it. Naito smiled as he was casually holding his Kusanagi sword while pointing it against Kijiyama, then he suddenly waved it. Kijiyama looked confused, but he knew that no matter what he does, he cannot win against Naito. Suddenly, Kijiyama collapsed again on the ground. You got one eye left, are you willing to sacrifice it? Naito retracted his sword and kept looking at Kijiyama's body on the ground, and sure enough, it disappeared again. But this time he didn't appear right in front of Naito. What? Naito was slightly surprised. He immediately started to look for him with his ultra perceive, and suddenly he felt Sarutobi moving toward him in the distance. Without paying attention to him, Naito continued on looking. Finally, he found Kijiyama. Kijiyama was in a secret room, and he was looking for something. So you still wanna play? Naito shook his hand and waved his sword toward him. Whoosh! This simple move sent a shock-cutting force flying in the air. Suddenly, the whole room got cut into two halves, and Naito appeared in front of Kijiyama. The shock wave didn't stop and flew directly toward Kijiyama. Kijiyama threw immediately the thing in his hand and tried to avoid it. However, it still hit his hand and cut it from his shoulder, splashing the blood on the ground. However, this wasn't important. What looked confusing is how Kijiyama's eyes were overflowing with blood, and they weren't his blind eyes, but a pair of Mangekyou Sharingan. What a pain! Without paying any attention to his hand that has been cut off, Kijiyama bit his teeth, ready for a second round, yet his eyes looked blurred. Obviously, these Mangekyou Sharingan are also at the edge of blindness. As long as I have these eyes, I can still. Kijiyama stared at Naito, then he rushed at him wildly. Whoosh! Suddenly, a strange black fire rushed in front of Naito, but it didn't directly hit him. This Amaterasu. This Mangekyou Sharingan has this ability, but it looks like it's at the edge of blindness. You won't be able to hit me. Naito shook his head and smiled at Kijiyama with a trace of pity in his eyes. Using this technique can be considered an honor. It was used by the likes of Uchiha Itachi and Uchiha Sasuke. It's a total waste on a guy like Kijiyama. However, looking at that black fire in front of him, Naito couldn't help but feel that he can beat it. Suddenly, Naito extended his hand and pressed the air around that black flames. This simple move created some kind of transparent glass in the space, which let the air in front of it burst open. Naito's use of shock force became completely pure. He doesn't just control its power, but he also can control its direction at will. Suddenly, under Naito's palm, the black flames got wrapped by the shock force and turned into a ball. Whom? Under the watchful blurry eyes of Kijiyama, the Amaterasu faded away. No. This is impossible. The Amaterasu is an eternal flame, how can this be? Kijiyama couldn't believe what he saw. At that moment, his heart sunk in despair, and he started to attack Naito wildly. The black flames kept bursting, targeting Naito until it finally hit his body. However, there was no effect at all. Naito didn't even move this time. The shock force just started bursting out of his body, shattering the black flames. Sure enough, with my shock force, I can even destroy the sky. After he completely destroyed the Amaterasu, a smile got drawn on Naito's face. He's now more certain that his shock force can destroy everything, similar to the sixth path power. Kageyama put his hand on his eye, then fell on his knees helplessly. He felt desperate, his mind was in vain, he couldn't even feel the pain coming from his eyes. The moment he got rid of the Amaterasu, a shout suddenly came from the distance. "You Naito! Stop!" Sarutobi was the person who shouted. He barely managed to reach the place at the right time. Everything happened very fast, although the military police force building was very close to his building. He could hear him, but Naito didn't hesitate to end this. Crack! The air collapsed, as the shock force slammed down Kageyama's body and smashed it completely. Naito wasn't ready to give him another opportunity, and he wasn't interested in the Amaterasu, so he destroyed the Mangekyou Sharingan along with him. "You Naito! You!" Unfortunately, Sarutobi couldn't stop Naito. He took a look at the field and revealed a stunned expression, then he looked back at him, and immediately got very angry. "How could you do such a thing? These are our shinobis." Listening to Sarutobi, Naito suddenly laughed as a trace of mockery, then he directly looked at Sarutobi, and the thing that happened with Uchiha Rin. "Are you telling me that you didn't know about it?" This sentence made Sarutobi speechless. The fight has happened inside the village, there's no way that they didn't notice it. Observing the look on Sarutobi's face, Naito shook his head with a dull expression, then he walked over. "Clean up the mess." For Sarutobi, the good old days of Naito were already gone. If he didn't care about Kushina, and how Sarutobi was taking care of her, Naito would have crushed him along with these Uchiha members on the ground. The moment he passed by Sarutobi, Naito felt the former's heart secretly shaking, but he was too lazy to pay attention. As long as he doesn't provoke Naito, the last won't harm him. Konoha doesn't mean anything for Naito anymore. If it wasn't for Dai, Tsunade, Kushina, and the other, he would have crushed it today. When Naito left, the Anbu rushed to the place, and from the first glance at the field, they got stunned. What happened? Is Naito the one who did this to the Uchiha clan? Even the elites were hardly breathing while looking at this scene. Since the loss of thousands of clans in the Second Ward, the Uchiha clan has become the largest clan in Konoha. But now it seems that this so-called big clan has been crushed in no time by Naito. Of course, more importantly, how dare he attack them inside of the village? How about the Hokage? Some of them were really confused. They couldn't help but look at the Hokage, who seemed very serious. Is he gonna ask them to catch you, Naito? Please don't. None of them will dare to do so, and even if they did, how in the world will they catch him? A person who destroyed the whole Uchiha clan in a short period, a man who is being called a god. Sarutobi kept silent for a long time, then he finally took a deep breath and said, "The Uchiha clan has been attacked by enemies, and Naito arrived at time and killed the invaders. Clean up the mess." Sarutobi said this last sentence, and the matter got conclusive. The Anbu in the place and even the survivors of the Uchiha clan know that what Sarutobi said is nonsense, but they couldn't do anything about it. They kept silent for a short period, then they quickly began to clean up the battlefield. On the streets of Konoha, people were gathered everywhere. All of them looked terrified. They thought that enemies have broke into the village. But since there was no actual invasion, the ninjas didn't receive any orders about evacuation, so they were all in a state of chaos. Suddenly the crowd calmed down. Although it was very crowded, some of them could notice Naito walking on the other side of the street heading toward his home. Silence. Hey, did you see that? Naito was just over there. Since he's here, do you think he already dealt with the invaders? Of course. They dared to attack Konoha, so they got killed by Naito or not. The expression on their faces showed a bit of admiration as they were watching Naito entering his home, and closing the door behind him. Suddenly, all of them calmed down and smiled at each other in relief. Naito was very popular among the civilians in Konoha. He was even more famous than Sakumo. In their hearts, he even surpassed the third Hokage. Naito opened the door and walked in. He saw Kushina standing there quietly at the window looking in the direction of the Uchiha clan. She noticed Naito, so she turned very fast to look at him. "You're not hurt?" Kushina didn't care about what Naito did, nor what will happen next. She was only worried about him. This sentence made Naito's footsteps stop a little bit. "Do you think they would be able to hurt me?" With a smile on his face, Naito shrugged his shoulder to Kushina, then he immediately took off his coat and hung it. But Kushina was still staring at him. "Hey, if you don't believe me, why don't you come and check it yourself?" After pouring a glass of water for himself, Naito smiled at Kushina. Kushina got used to Naito's dirty jokes, so she ignored him, and muttered, "You scared me. You actually thought that I'm gonna harm the village." Naito smiled, and reached Kushina and took her over, then he lay back, letting her sit in his arms. Kushina had a blush on her cheeks, but she didn't resist him, and sat in his arms and looked closer to him. Naito didn't look like himself, his eyes seemed very deep. Or maybe it was just Naito's momentum. "I'm happy you're here." Kushina leaned her head on Naito's shoulders and whispered softly. Although she already made her choice, she was still worried about Naito. After all, he was trying to face the entire village. She wasn't a fool. Kushina was very clever. She could tell the situation that Naito was in, from the attitudes of the elders of Konoha. They even tried to prevent her from staying together with Naito. In the past, Sarutobi was supporting them, but he wasn't sure about his decision. He wanted to use Kushina as a rope to keep Naito close, but there were some disadvantages. If Naito decided one day to leave the village, he would take her along with him. Those who were against the decision found it really difficult to keep her away from Naito. In this world, once someone falls in love, they will do anything for that person. If Sasuke asked Sakura to come along with him in that night, she wouldn't even hesitate. Currently, the situation is not that bad. Naito looked at Kushina, then he kissed her. She looked at him, then she tightened her arms around him. "In short, I don't consider Konoha more than just a place to stay. I've paid my dues to this village, and it's enough for both of us." "Yes." Kushina stretched out her hand, reaching Naito's cheek, then she gently pinched it, then smiled and said, "In short, we will never be separated again." "Of course." Naito nodded lightly while he was looking into her eyes. The atmosphere suddenly became a bit strange, and the blush on Kushina's face became more evident. Holding her in his arm, Naito kept looking at her for a moment, then he gently leaned toward her. Konoha, Hokage building. In one room, 4 people sit side by side: Sarutobi, Danza, Homura Mitokado, and Koharu Utatane. However, the topic of this meeting was quite different from the previous one. They used to think about how to control Naito, now they're just so afraid to provoke him. The kind of power that Naito used to attack the Uchiha clan has shocked even Sarutobi. It's true that the fact he could defeat the entire clan of the Uchiha is scary, but what was more frightening is the short period he needed to do so. Sarutobi received the news very quickly. How long did it take him to reach them? It was just a moment. But within this moment, the Uchiha clan got defeated. It must be known that the Uchiha clan doesn't represent the whole village, but being the strongest clan in Konoha is not just for show. This kind of power makes Sarutobi and the people who want to take Naito down realize that even if they have the power to do that, Konoha will suffer huge casualties in the process. Although Naito is not an evil guy, and he will never slaughter civilians, they couldn't risk this. What if they stood in his way? Who know what he would do? They cannot let something like this happen. The final decision was to never try to provoke Naito, which led them to completely abandon the idea of separating him from Kushina. The cost of forcing Naito to leave her might be very expensive. In comparison, breaking some rules, and leaving him be, will grant them peace for the time being. If unscrupulous will grant peace, whether it's Sarutobi or Danza, everyone will choose peace. But because Sarutobi was the Hokage, if anything wrong happens he be forced to take full responsibility for this decision. This might even cause him to lose his position, but if it will make Konoha a better place, he was willing to sacrifice his position as the Hokage. Because he was the Hokage, the successor of the Will of Fire. Among the four of them, Mitokado and Utatane supported Sarutobi's decision, and three of them voted for it. After all, Naito won't last forever, there will always be aging, and he will eventually die. If they needed to choose between power and Konoha, they would always choose Konoha. Of course, the only one who objected to this decision is Danza. However, Sarutobi has already turned Mitokado and Utatane on his side. It's not that Danza puts power before Konoha, but he believes that if he could control that power, he could lead Konoha to prosper. Naito was just a stumbling blocking him from reaching that power, and he felt they should find a way to remove him. In the original, Pain attacked the village and wrecked it to the ground, yet he kept hiding in the dark and didn't lead his route to rescue Konoha. Instead, he believed that this was gonna lead to the born of a new Konoha, a place where he will be the sixth Hokage, and everything can be repaired after that. An underground area outside of Konoha. This was Orochimaru's secret base, which was the place that Naito has came to before. Naito came here again and entered the base after he was welcomed by Orochimaru. Orochimaru stood in front of him, holding a scroll in his hand. This is the results of the research on the enhancement of the soul. I have compiled the essentials, and I have studied its details over the past few months. This time, Orochimaru didn't have his relaxed and casual look. He spoke to Naito very seriously, and with a careful tone. Orochimaru has always been very good at choosing sides, and what kind of attitude he should use with every person, the same way he did when he was in the Akatsuki. Orochimaru just didn't expect Takai to be that strong. It was one mistake, and he never did it again. I brought you the pair of the Mangekyou Sharingan eyes that you wanted. Naito took over the scroll without looking at it, and at the same time, he handed him a small bottle. He was keeping the Mangekyou Sharingan inside that bottle. After he crushed the Uchiha clan, Orochimaru found him and asked him for a pair of Sharingan. Naito had promised to help him twice, and this is one. Naito didn't bring him what he exactly asked. Instead, he brought him a pair of Mangekyou Sharingan. He just didn't care much about giving them to Orochimaru. Orochimaru kept looking at them, just as the original. He didn't discover the power of these eyes yet, but it doesn't mean that he didn't know enough about them. Knowing that these were a pair of Mangekyou Sharingans in his hand, made Orochimaru feel ecstatic. He didn't even care that these eyes were close to blindness or difficult to use. Moreover, these eyes directly offset the two things that Naito has promised him. The value of these eyes is, of course, extraordinary. In Orochimaru's view, these two eyes worth more than the two things Naito has asked from him. If he could match the right cells with these two eyes, he would be able to use it without no restrictions and side effects. The ability of these two eyes is controlling the light, and creating illusions that can actually launch a real attack, which is terrible. With these eyes alone, he could even face a Hokage. Unfortunately, they were close to blindness. He wasn't sure how much more it will last. But Orochimaru can restore it if he could match it with the right cells. This was great, and these abilities were very suitable for him. Naito didn't care about giving these eyes to Orochimaru. This ability doesn't work on Naito's Ultra Perceive, but they could work on Sarutobi. Still, he didn't care. Orochimaru took these eyes with an ill-concealed joy. Mangekyou Sharingan. I didn't expect the Uchiha clan to have them. I thought these never been seen after the death of Uchiha Madara. There's now, and there will be more in the future. As long as the Uchiha clan is not destroyed, there will always be people who stand out and gets these eyes. Naito looked at Orochimaru and said these words. Naito didn't care about these eyes, nor about the people who will awake them in the future. He was only interested in the eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. Speaking of it, Naito is more interested now in what will happen after Orochimaru gets these eyes. This will cause significant disruption to the later plots. Of course, Naito was looking at it with the attitude of a bystander, or with a gesture above it. Nothing can stand against Naito from being the strongest in the world. The only people who could face him are neither dead nor about to die. His strength is enough to destroy a whole country. Therefore, Naito's mentality has gradually changed. He started to overlook a lot of things, such as the third Hokage. He doesn't care about little things like this anymore. Of course, when we talk about Naito, there's always one thing he cares about, is that to become stronger, and he never stopped thinking about that. Orochimaru, what do you know about the Sage Mode? Naito looked at Orochimaru, then at the gift he just gave him, then asked him casually. When Orochimaru heard Naito's question, he looked up and said, I know the method of Ryuchi Cave, but it's challenging to learn. I've never been able to practice it successfully, but if you want, I can write it down for you. Okay. Naito nodded, and Orochimaru immediately turned around and recorded the whole information he knew on a scroll and handed it to Naito. For Orochimaru, the value of the Mangekyou Sharingan is too high. Even the cultivation method of the Sage Mode wasn't enough to match it. The method is complicated and practicing it needs a lot of work and knowledge. In contrast, the Mangekyou Sharingan eyes were an actual thing, and he had it right in his hands. The value of these two eyes is naturally incomparable. I will leave now. After he took the scroll from Orochimaru, Naito turned and left the place. Orochimaru had looked deep into Naito's back, then he shook his head, and with an ecstatic expression, he took the Mangekyou Sharingan out of the bottle. You came back. When Naito returned home, Kushina smiled at him, then she greeted him. I am home. Naito nodded at her, then he walked aside and took out the two scrolls. The first was the cultivation method of the Ryuchi Cave, and the other was the research of the soul enhancement. When she saw the two scrolls, Kushina leaned on his back looking at them, then she said, something about that Orochimaru guy doesn't seem right. You better be careful around him. Naito smiled at her, then he said to her, he sure doesn't seem right, he doesn't have any choice but to seem right in front of me. Yes, you is, of course, you're best, you're the almighty. All hail the god of Shinobi, you Naito. Kushina laughed as she said these words. Naito was about to open the scroll, but when he heard how was Kushina making fun of him, he simply threw the scroll and reached her, and flipped her in midair, then he directly put her on the table in front of him. Kushina was shocked, she's a ninja, but she couldn't even react to Naito's fast movement. Hey! What are you doing? It's daytime. You think I am not the best? I will show you how amazing I am. Naito suddenly flipped her again on her stomach, and Kushina couldn't help but exclaim. Kushina wanted to stand up, but it was too late, Naito has already started. Naito's finger has already reached her shoulders. T/N, I hope you didn't think that something else was about to happen XD. Wait. No. Stop. Kushina wanted to say something, but at the next moment, her body started to tremble, and couldn't finish her sentence. She felt a weird force passing from her shoulders and spreading to her whole body, which made it shudder and lose strength. Naito's fingers were simply pointed on her shoulders, while a slight faint light shining on the tips of his fingers. Naito now can easily control his shock force to the extent where it's too weak, even regular people could withstand it. The shock force can be used to strengthening and enhancing the physical power of the body. It doesn't work on Naito's body anymore since it got adapted to that effect. But for Kushina, who didn't experience it a lot of times, the effect was excellent. Naito needed to open the fifth stage of the shock force to achieve this level of perfect control. However, it seemed to regular people as if he was massaging her. At this time, Kushina could barely withstand it. Because Naito wasn't just tempering her body, he was adjusting the power of the shock force every time. The stronger it gets, the more its effect will be better, but this will cause the numbness to become more like pain. For Kushina, Naito's power is very subtle. Naito kept moving his fingers on her back from top to bottom, again and again, until he finally finished the work. Kushina looked very exhausted, her clothes got soaked in sweat, she couldn't even speak, so she kept laying there for a while. Naito looked at Kushina, who was still laying there, and turned to pour a glass of water for her, then came back again. Kushina, who couldn't even stand up a moment ago, gradually regained her strength in that short period. The physical strength of the Uzumaki clan is inherently good, and this method that Naito was using on her, was helping her to fully develop her hidden physical powers. Naito's methods are always strange. Bastard! Kushina, who had recovered her strength, stood up and clenched her fist, and rushed toward Naito. Why can't you just be grateful that I care about you? I am just afraid about your safety, but you instead. Me. What did I do? Naito shrugged at Kushina, then with a smile he said, don't I care about you too? I just helped you enhance your physical power. Kushina was wet with sweat, she looked as if she was training the whole day, but Kushina didn't feel tired, she actually felt fresh and gradually more powerful. She gnawed her teeth, and screamed at Naito, saying, I told you to stop. You told me it was daytime. So we're not allowed to practice in the daytime. Naito looked at Kushina with a sly look, then handed the cup of water over to her, saying, Your sweetie, drink some water. And whose fault is that? With a grumpy look, Kushina stared at Naito, then she finally took the cup from him. After she drank it, she slammed it on the table. Of course, she didn't mind practicing with Naito at any time, What drove her crazy was something else, but she was embarrassed to say it. Noticing at the look on Kushina's face, Naito couldn't help but smile. He looked as if he knew what she was thinking, saying, "Anyway, aren't you embarrassed? I can see everything right now." Puff. Kushina couldn't withstand it anymore and rushed toward Naito, biting his shoulder. "Stop! Stop! It hurts." It didn't really hurt him, but Naito acted like it was very painful. When Kushina saw his expression, she immediately jumped over him and waved her fist, shouting, "I will beat you up." Looking at how she reacted, Naito couldn't help but laugh. Then he extended his finger, and smirked, "Do you want to take one more bite? I am gonna kill you." So fiercely, Kushina exposed her teeth like a tiger, threatening Naito. Okay, let's stop this, go take a shower." Naito kept laughing for a while. Because she was at home, Kushina was wearing a single coat, and it was so wet, Naito could almost see everything. However, Kushina didn't care about that. After all, they lived together for so long. After snoring at Naito, she walked into the bathroom. Naito shrugged, then picked up the scroll, after he used his ultra perceive to check if there were any spies. Speaking of it, my ultra perceive range got increased, but I still couldn't add colors. What a pity, it's just like the Bakugan. But it has its advantages. It cannot be caught by genjutsu, it's a special perception that is independent of the five senses. Naito opened his eyes again and looked at the scroll. However, Kushina was already out of the bathroom. She stood right in front of him with her bath towel, then she threw some clothes on his head. "You got wet, go take a shower." Naito opened his eyes and grabbed the clothes, then looked at Kushina. He couldn't help but smile, and said, "It's not even my sweat. So what, you got to take a shower?" Although this was unreasonable, Naito took the clothes and went to the bathroom. "Why do I have to do what she says?" Naito stretched out his body, then jumped into the bathroom. Suddenly the door got opened. Naito was half naked. Kushina didn't look at him and went directly toward her clothes to wash them. "You. I am only here because I want to wash my clothes." Naito kept washing his body while looking at how serious Kushina was doing her laundering. Naito couldn't help but take his revenge. While he was taking his shower, he sent a weak shock wave which caused the water to splash all over her dry clothes. Naito tried to act innocent and continued on taking his shower. Then he calmly said, "Ow, how unfortunate, take it off and rewash it, I don't mind it." Kushina. Naito. Ha ha ha. Naito couldn't hold back anymore and laughed loudly. Kushina. Kushina suddenly looked at him with an angry expression, then she rushed toward a bucket full of water and dropped it on his clothes. Naito shouted, "Why did you do that?" Suddenly the bathroom turned into a battlefield. They kept pranking each other back and forth until Kushina got really tired and lied down on the bed to rest. After she fell asleep, Naito finally found time to study the two scrolls, so he sat down at the table and opened them both. First, he carefully studied the method of the Ryuchi cave on practicing the Sage mode. After he read the whole thing, Naito could quickly notice how different it was from the Mount Myoboku method. Mount Myoboku had special oil to assist the cultivation, but nothing like this was mentioned in the scroll. Obviously, the two methods were different. Moreover, in the original, the two transformations were pretty different. The first was sturdy, but the others looked as if they had some characteristics of the snake. To put it bluntly, there's Hashirama's Sage mode, which is an exceptional one where the user even gains a very powerful self-healing ability. This sage mode can be activated at will and doesn't require a long time of absorbing natural energy, but the method HolyOniiSama used to obtain this sage mode wasn't explained in the original. But the only certain thing is that the sage modes of Mount Myokabu, Ruchi Cave, and Shikotsu Forest are entirely different. Which one should be chosen between these three? Naito had trouble finding the right answer for this question. Although the only method he had currently was Ryuchi Cave, it wasn't difficult for Naito to get the other two. Naito could get some help from Jiraiya if he wanted. Although he already knew the method. He knows already that 2 out of 3 methods are different, and the third should also have its own way, but Naito wants to have his own way, a way that will be the most suitable for him. If he could learn the 3 of them and create a new one, it will be the most suitable, and his sage mode will be undoubtedly the best. For the time being, Naito put the cultivation method of the sage mode aside and continued to study the Scroll of Soul. This was boring because this is something that wasn't mentioned in the original. These were Orochimaru's own researches, and it required a lot of scrutinies. Naito kept studying it for a few days. Finally, he finished studying it and began cultivation. The effect at the beginning was excellent. Naito could even feel the enhancement of his soul, and this made his control of chakra stronger. The chakra itself became stronger, even his shock force got enhanced. However, after half a month, the effect gradually slowed down, and finally, the progress became negligible. Obviously, the enhancement had a limit. At this point, his soul power increased by at least 1/3. It doesn't look much, but it was already beyond Naito's expectations. He thought it will be much lesser. With this 1/3 only, both Naito's chakra and shock force become stronger and more subtle. Naito's first obstacle from cultivating the sage mode was his chakra amount, but with this enhancement, it reached the standards. The next step is to have perfect control, to achieve a balance between the natural energy and his own chakra, otherwise, it will fade. Failing while following the method of the Mount Myokabu will turn you into a petrified frog, and failing using the Ryuchi Cave method will mean getting eaten by the white snake. Naito didn't have any guidance, he needed to explore everything by himself, so he needed more preparation. Naito needed to figure out the third way, so he went directly to the source and found Tsunade. Tsunade was just in the village. During this time, she didn't go to gamble like she always does, or maybe she lost everything and went back to Konoha. Seeing Naito has always made her happy. Although he was currently in the village, Naito was always busy doing his own things, and Tsunade didn't want to disturb him. She rarely takes the initiative to find him. After a simple greeting, Naito directly said what he had. Sage mode. Tsunade looked a little bit surprised. After she thought for a little bit, she said, "I am aware of it, but since it seems I'm not qualified to learn it, I've never put a lot of thought in it. Not everyone is qualified to learn the sage mode. For example, the 4th Hokage Minato couldn't successfully use it, and he himself said that he had a lot of trouble learning it. Sure enough, as I suspected, the Katsuyu slugs have their own special sage mode." Tsunade looked at Naito, and with a solemn tone, she said, "So you're asking me to give you the Katsuyu method? I heard that it's a very dangerous one. Maybe you should go directly to the Shikotsu forest and meet the great slug sage." The slug sage. Naito was surprised when he heard these words. He already knew that these slugs had their own sage. However, Naito was surprised that Tsunade has suggested meeting him and learning the sage mode directly from the Shikotsu forest. Would they be willing to teach him? Tsunade sensed Naito's worries. She smiled and patted his shoulder, then said, "Rest reassured, she's very gentle and easy to talk with. even if you don't sign a contract, she will be willing to work and communicate with you. Besides, even if she didn't want to, you will still have me. Tsunade pat Naito's head, showing a trace of a sister trait, letting Naito's mouth twitch slightly. After her little brother Nawaki got killed, the tendency of the sister little brother's control became more serious. Naito didn't have a blood contract with the slugs, therefore, they couldn't do a reverse summon and directly enter the forest. Therefore, Naito left Konoha with Tsunade and went directly to the forest. Shikotsu Forest was much closer than Mount Myokabu, and since both of them were incredibly fast, they arrived in a few days. The forest was under the ground. It was an extraordinary wide cave under the ground, that used to be a massive volcano. We're here, the sage should be there. Tsunade looked around, then pointed in one direction. This forest and the 3 other places are all legendary holy lands. The age of the sages was unknown, they were all ancient existences. While walking into this forest, the 2 of them often encountered some slugs around the place. These creatures were all greeting Tsunade. Soon, Naito and Tsunade reached the slug sage. Its body was indeed huge, even Naito couldn't hide his shock. At a distance, Naito could see other huge slugs around. Even the Tsunade's original summon Kotsuyu looked small compared to the slug sage. I was also shocked when I first met her. Tsunade looked at him and smiled. The huge slug turned around its head and looked at both of them. Well, isn't it, Tsunade, why did you came here? Although it was very huge, her voice was no different from Kotsuyu. It's incredibly gentle, and didn't have any murderous intent like the snakes. Her warm voice made Naito's shock gradually fade. Tsunade bowed at her, then she raised her head and casually said, "We came here to know more about the Sage mode." That's it for this video, guy. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.